So, I got something interesting for you today, Emma. Like, one of the most influential tech minds of our generation who literally changed how we all interact with information.
Oh my God, yes. We're diving into Larry Page today on Behind the Billions, and I'm actually so excited about this one. Larry Page is just he's absolutely fascinating because, he co-founded Google with Sergey Brin and basically revolutionized how we search for information online.
Right? It's crazy to think about how we used to find stuff before Google. Like, how did we even survive?
I know. And what's really incredible is that Page didn't just create a better search engine. He and Brin, they fundamentally changed our relationship with information. Like, they made the entire world's knowledge accessible with just a few keystrokes.
And turned that idea into one of the most valuable companies on the planet. I mean, from a Stanford dorm room project to, well, basically controlling how we find everything online.
Exactly. And Page's story goes way beyond just Google. His vision led to Alphabet, Android, YouTube, self-driving cars, and so many other technologies that shape our daily lives. He's worth about $140 billion now. But the real story is how his thinking and leadership style created that value in the first place.
So, what made this guy tick? How did he build all that?
That's exactly what we're going to explore today.
So, let's dig into where this tech genius actually came from. Where did Larry Page grow up?
Yeah, so Larry Page was born in Lansing, Michigan in 1973. And it's fascinating because he was basically born into the computer world. Like, both his parents were computer science professors at Michigan State University. His dad, Carl, was a pioneer in computer science and AI, and his mom, Gloria, taught computer programming.
Wow, so computers were literally in his DNA, huh?
Exactly. And what's really cool is that their home was just completely filled with technology magazines and computers and gadgets everywhere. Page actually said his childhood home was usually a mess with computers, science, and technology magazines all over the place. It was like this perfect environment for a future tech innovator.
So, he was surrounded by tech from day one. When did he actually start using computers himself?
So when Larry was just 6 years old in 1979, his dad brought home this computer called an Exidy Sorcerer, and little Larry just totally mastered it. He became the first kid in his elementary school to turn in an assignment from a word processor, which was pretty mind-blowing back then,
That's so early. Most kids were playing with toys and he's programming computers?
right? And he wasn't just using them, he was taking them apart. He once said, "From a very early age, I also realized I wanted to invent things. So I became interested in technology and business. Probably from when I was 12, I knew I was going to start a company eventually." Like, who thinks that way at 12 years old?
Not many kids, that's for sure. What about his education? Where did he go to school?
So Page went to East Lansing High School and then got his bachelor's degree in computer engineering from the University of Michigan. And get this, while he was at Michigan, he built an inkjet printer out of Lego bricks, like a functioning printer. He basically reverse engineered ink cartridges and built all the electronics and mechanics to drive it.
Wait, he made a working printer out of Lego? That's insane.
I know. And and he was also really into music, which is something people don't talk about enough. He played saxophone, went to music summer camp, and he's actually said that his musical training influenced how he thought about Google's speed. He said, "In music, you're very cognizant of time. If you're a percussionist, you hit something, it's got to happen in milliseconds." That obsession with speed later became a core part of Google's appeal.
I never knew that connection between his music and Google's speed. What happened after Michigan?
So after Michigan, he headed to Stanford for his PhD in computer science, and that's where everything changed. He was looking for a dissertation topic and got really interested in the mathematical structure of the web, basically seeing the internet as this massive graph of links. His advisor, Terry Winograd, encouraged him to pursue it, and Page later said it was the best advice he ever got.
And that's where he met Sergey Brin, right?
Exactly. Sergey joined Larry's research project, which they nicknamed Backrub. And, well, the rest is history. That research project, exploring the link structure of the web, would eventually become Google and completely transform how we access information forever.
So, tell me about this Backrub project. How did it actually turn into Google?
So, the whole thing started when Larry was trying to figure out his PhD dissertation at Stanford, right? And he had this really interesting insight about the web. He realized that, like, the entire web was basically built on this concept of citation. Basically, what is a link but a citation to another page? And he thought, if I could figure out a way to count and qualify each backlink on the web would become a more valuable place.
That's a pretty big leap from how search engines worked before, wasn't it?
Oh, totally. Back then, search engines were they were terrible, honestly. They just looked for how many times a keyword appeared on a page. But Larry was thinking, what if we could use the links between pages to determine which ones were actually important? And, when Sergey got involved, that's when things really took off. Sergey was this polymath who'd been jumping between projects, and he found Backrub absolutely fascinating.
So how did they actually build this thing?
This is the crazy part. They literally turned Larry's dorm room into this makeshift laboratory. They were extracting parts from cheap computers to build their own servers. And when they ran out of space in Larry's room, they converted Sergey's dorm room into an office and programming center.
That must have been a mess.
Oh my God, it was. And they were actually causing problems for Stanford's computing infrastructure because their project was growing so fast. By August 1996, they had this very basic version of Google, though it wasn't called that yet, running on Stanford's website. And get this, by early 1997, they had indexed over 75 million URLs and downloaded more than 207 gigabytes of content. That's tiny by today's standards, but it was mind-blowing back then.
What about the actual algorithm? How did PageRank work?
Right, so PageRank, which by the way was named after Larry, not web pages, was this brilliant algorithm that essentially viewed links as votes. If your website got linked to by lots of other websites, especially important ones, then your site was probably important too. It's like if a well-respected person recommends you, that recommendation means more than if some random person does.
And that was completely revolutionary at the time, right?
Absolutely revolutionary. No one was thinking that way. And what made Google so powerful wasn't just that it found relevant results, it ranked them really well. Larry was obsessed with speed too. He once said, "Pretty soon we had 10,000 searches a day, and we figured maybe this is real."
So when did they decide to turn it into a company?
So that's a funny story. By 1998, they realized they had something valuable and started looking for investors. They pitched to Stanford professors, family, friends, anyone who would listen. And then they got this legendary meeting with Andy Bechtolsheim, who was a co-founder of Sun Microsystems.
And how did that go?
Well, the story goes that after a quick demo, Bechtolsheim was so impressed that he just wrote them a check for $100,000 on the spot, made out to Google Inc. Only problem was, Google Inc. didn't exist yet. They hadn't even incorporated the company. So they had this $100,000 check that they couldn't deposit for 2 weeks while they figured out the paperwork.
That's wild. Where did the name Google come from anyway?
It actually came from the word Google, which is the number 1 followed by 100 zeros. They chose it to represent the vast amount of data they were planning to organize. They eventually rented space in a garage in Menlo Park, which belonged to Susan Wojcicki, who later became a Google executive, for $1,700 a month. And that's where they really built Google's foundation.
And what was their mission at that point?
Their mission was beautifully simple: to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And you know what's amazing? That's still Google's mission today. By June 2000, they had indexed 1 billion URLs, making it the most comprehensive search engine on the web. They had created something that truly changed how we interact with information forever.
So, once Google was officially a company, what was Page's role in those early days?
So, Page immediately appointed himself CEO, while Sergey became Google's president. And you know what's really interesting about Larry in those early days? He had these, super intense management principles. He actually wrote them down for the team to follow, things like do not delegate and do not be a bureaucrat. And my personal favorite, ideas are more important than age. He was obsessed with making things happen quickly.
What was his leadership style like?
Oh my God, he was intense is probably the best word. He had this obsession with speed. He would literally fret over milliseconds, not seconds, milliseconds, in how fast search results would load. And he pushed his engineers really hard on this. He also famously kept Google's homepage super sparse with almost no design elements because, it would load faster.
Was that approach sustainable as the company grew?
Not really. There's this crazy story about how in 2001, Page tried to fire all of Google's project managers. He wanted all the engineers to report directly to VPs who would then report to him. His reasoning was that he didn't like non-engineers supervising engineers because they didn't have enough technical knowledge. But that model was totally unsustainable as Google kept expanding.
So how fast was Google growing at this point?
Incredibly fast. They moved from that garage to a proper office in Mountain View by early 2000, riding on a $1 million loan from friends and family. And by mid-1999, they were getting so much traffic that Page was experimenting with smaller servers so they could fit more into each square meter of warehouse space. This actually led to a search engine that ran much faster than any of their competitors at the time.
At what point did Page step aside from being CEO?
That's a really interesting story. So when Kleiner Perkins and Sequoia Capital, two of Silicon Valley's biggest investors, agreed to invest $50 million in Google. They actually applied pressure on Page to step down as CEO. They wanted like a more experienced leader who could build what they called a world-class management team.
How did Page feel about that?
Well, at first he wasn't too keen on the idea, as you can imagine. But after meeting with other tech CEOs, including Steve Jobs and Intel's Andrew Grove, he eventually came around. So in March 2001, they hired Eric Schmidt as chairman, and by August, Schmidt left his position as CEO of Novel to become Google's CEO, and Page moved to president of products.
Did Page still have a lot of influence even after stepping aside?
Oh, absolutely. The employees still saw him as the boss. He gave final approval on all new hires, and it was actually Page who provided the signature for Google's IPO in 2004, which made him a billionaire at just 30 years old. And even though Schmidt was running things day to day, he always consulted with Page and Brin on major initiatives.
What about acquisitions during this period?
Yeah. So Page led this really pivotal acquisition in 2005 that changed everything. Android for $50 million. And get this, he did it without even telling Schmidt. He was just passionate about putting handheld computers in consumers' hands so they could access Google anywhere. And man, that turned out to be one of the most brilliant moves ever. By 2010, Android had overtaken Apple in market share, and it's now the world's most popular mobile operating system.
So would you say Page was still very much the visionary even when he wasn't CEO?
100%. Though some people actually called this his lost decade, because while he had significant influence on product development, he became increasingly disconnected over time. But that leadership break gave him time to rethink his approach before he eventually returned as CEO in 2011.
So what led to Page returning as CEO in 2011? That must have been a pretty significant moment for Google.
Oh, it was huge. So, in January 2011, Eric Schmidt made this announcement that he was stepping down, and he actually tweeted something like, "Adult supervision no longer needed," which was pretty funny. And by April 4th, Page was officially back in the CEO chair. And by this point, Google was like a totally different beast than when he'd left. They had over $180 billion market cap and more than 24,000 employees.
What was different about Page's approach the second time around?
You know what's really interesting is that Page had totally changed his management philosophy. His first time as CEO, he was all about like these intense arguments and being super harsh. But during his time away, he realized that if you want to achieve really ambitious goals, you need a harmonious team environment.
How did he implement that new approach?
So he formed what people called the L Team, a group of senior VPs who reported directly to him and worked near his office for part of the week. And he also reorganized the entire senior management structure, placing CEO-like managers at the top of Google's most important divisions like YouTube, AdWords, and Google Search.
I've heard about Page's famous 10X mentality. What was that all about?
Yes, the 10X thing was just core to who Larry was. He basically expected Google employees to create products that were at least 10 times better than those of competitors. Not just incrementally better, but like fundamentally, revolutionarily better. In a 2013 Wired interview, he said, "If you're not doing some things that are crazy, then you're doing the wrong things." And that really summed up his whole approach.
Did that approach lead to any significant changes at Google?
Oh my God, yes. He launched this massive overhaul that was internally called Project Kennedy. Between 2011 and 2013, they shut down at least 70 different Google products and services that weren't working or aligned with his vision. Everything that remained got this aesthetic redesign focused on what The Verge called refinement, white space, cleanliness, elasticity, usefulness, and most of all, simplicity.
What about new products and acquisitions during his second tenure?
That's where things got really interesting. So in response to Facebook's growing influence, Page finally launched Google Plus in 2011. And then in August of that same year, he made this absolutely massive announcement that Google would spend $12.5 billion to acquire Motorola Mobility.
Wow, that's a huge acquisition. What was the thinking behind that?
It was mainly about patents to protect Android. Page was really worried about what he called anti-competitive patent attacks from companies like Microsoft and Apple, but that one didn't actually work out so well. In 2014, he ended up selling Motorola to Lenovo for just $2.9 billion, which was like a $9.5 billion loss over 2 years.
That's quite the expensive mistake.
Yeah, but that's kind of the point of his whole moonshot philosophy, right? He was always willing to take these massive risks because the potential upside was so huge. And, you know, for every Motorola, there was an Android that completely changed the game.
So was Page focused mostly on consumer products?
Not at all. He launched this really fascinating initiative called Calico in 2013, which was all about biotechnology and human health. He brought in Art Levinson, who was Apple's chairman and former Genentech CEO, to run it. Page said something like, "Illness and aging affect all our families. With some longer-term moonshot thinking around healthcare and biotechnology, I believe we can improve millions of lives."
That's a pretty ambitious goal outside of Google's core business.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what Page was all about, taking these huge, ambitious swings. In that same Wired interview, he was talking about how Tesla's Elon Musk wants to go to Mars to back up humanity and called it a worthy goal. Page was always thinking on that scale, which is probably why he eventually restructured the entire company into Alphabet.
Speaking of Alphabet, that was a pretty massive reorganization, right? What was the thinking behind that whole restructuring?
Oh my God, yes. So, like in August 2015, Larry made this huge announcement on Google's official blog. And basically, Google was becoming just one subsidiary under this new parent company called Alphabet. I remember being like, wait, what is happening? When I first read about it.
What was the reasoning behind such a major change?
So, the way Larry explained it was that Alphabet is mostly a collection of companies, the largest of which is Google. The idea was to make Google a bit slimmed down by taking all these far-out experimental projects and moving them into separate companies under Alphabet instead.
Why did he choose the name Alphabet?
Oh, that's actually a really cool story. Larry wrote in his announcement that they liked the name Alphabet because, it represents language, which he called one of humanity's most important innovations. But he also mentioned they liked that it means alphabet, like alpha is investment return above benchmark, which they were always striving for. It was like this perfect blend of meaning for what they were trying to do.
How did the structure work exactly?
Right, so under this new structure, Larry became the CEO of Alphabet, and Sundar Pichai, who had been running a lot of Google's core products, became the CEO of Google itself. This allowed the core search and ads business to run really efficiently under Sundar, while Larry could focus on these big, ambitious moonshot projects through things like Google X, Calico, and their other crazy ventures.
That seemed to mark a shift in Page's public role too, didn't it?
Yeah, it totally did. And this is really interesting. Larry had actually been stepping back from public appearances way before Alphabet. Like, he hadn't done any press conferences since 2015, and he hadn't presented at product launches or earnings calls since 2013. Bloomberg Businessweek actually called the reorganization a clever retirement plan that let Larry retain control while giving up all the day-to-day responsibilities.
What was he focusing on instead?
Well, executives at Alphabet described him as this futurist who was really detached from the business details and more focused on these big moonshot projects. Some managers said he was still intensely involved, but others said his rare office check-ins were akin to a royal visit, which I just think is such a vivid description, right?
Did that arrangement last long?
It lasted about 4 years. In December 2019, Larry and Sergey announced they were stepping down completely. Sundar Pichai took over as CEO of both Google and Alphabet. In their joint blog post, they wrote something like, "We've never been ones to hold on to management roles when we think there's a better way to run the company." It really felt like the end of an era,
What do you think drove that final decision to step away?
I mean, I think Larry had been gradually distancing himself for years. By that point, he was much more interested in his personal projects and investments than running the day-to-day of even the parent company. And honestly, Google, Alphabet, had become such an enormous enterprise that it made sense to have someone like Sundar, who was deeply involved in operations, taking the reins completely.
So what has Larry been up to outside of Google? I know he's not just sitting around counting his billions.
Oh my God, not at all. Larry's actually been super busy with all these futuristic investments and projects that are totally fascinating. He's really into the idea of using technology to solve these massive global challenges, not just making better search engines or ads.
What kinds of projects has he been focusing on?
So one of the wildest ones has to be his investment in flying cars. I'm not even kidding. He's backed companies like Kitty Hawk and Opener, which are literally trying to make personal aerial vehicles a reality. Like the actual flying cars we all dreamed about as kids.
Wait, actual flying cars? That sounds straight out of a sci-fi movie.
I know, right? But that's so Larry Page. He's always been interested in these moonshot ideas that might seem crazy at first. He actually put it really well once when he said, "If you're not doing some things that are crazy, then you're doing the wrong things." And that's been his whole philosophy about innovation.
What about more practical areas? Is he investing in anything a bit more down to earth?
Well, he's been a major investor in renewable energy through Google.org, which is their philanthropic arm. He's particularly passionate about plug-in hybrid electric cars and other alternative energy investments. And he's actually a personal investor in Tesla Motors, which Elon Musk co-founded. They're friends.
I didn't realize he and Elon Musk were connected. That makes sense, though.
Totally. They're both like these visionary tech entrepreneurs who think way beyond just the next product cycle. But probably the most ambitious thing Larry's done is starting Calico in 2013. It's this incredible research and development company that's basically trying to solve aging and death.
You're kidding. How does that even work?
So Calico, which stands for California Life Company, is focused on biotechnology research aimed at extending human lifespan. When Larry announced it, he said something like, "Illness and aging affect all our families. With some longer-term moonshot thinking around healthcare and biotechnology, I believe we can improve millions of lives." He brought in Art Levinson, who was the former CEO of Genentech and chairman of Apple's board, to run it.
That's incredibly ambitious. Is there anything else driving his interests?
Yeah, he's really fascinated by the potential of artificial intelligence and advanced systems. He's actually helped set up Singularity University, which is it's kind of like a transhumanist think tank. He's super interested in how advanced digital technologies can create abundance, provide for people's needs, shorten the work week, all those big existential questions about how technology might transform human existence.
So he's really thinking about the far future of humanity.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Larry so fascinating to me. Like, he built this enormously successful company in Google, but all along he's been thinking about these much bigger questions about how technology can fundamentally improve human life. It's not just about making money for him, it's about using that success to push these boundaries that most people aren't even thinking about yet.
So what's Larry Page's personal life like? With that kind of wealth and influence, I imagine it must be pretty extraordinary.
It's fascinating, actually. So Larry married Lucinda Southworth back in 2007. And get this, they got married on Necker Island, which is Richard Branson's private Caribbean island. Like, that's the level we're talking about here. Lucinda is a research scientist, and they have 2 children together, born in 2009 and 2011.
I'd love to know more about how he lives day to day. What kind of homes does someone like Larry Page have?
So he's got this incredible historic property in Palo Alto that he bought back in 2005. It's this beautiful Spanish colonial revival house designed by Pedro Joseph de Lemos. But what's really interesting is what he did in 2009 when he started buying up all these adjacent properties to his home.
To build some massive compound?
Not exactly. He actually tore down the existing homes to build this super eco-friendly house. And I love this. He had all the materials from the demolished houses deconstructed and donated for reuse. The whole design was created to, minimize the impact on the environment. He even worked with an arborist to replace unhealthy trees with ones that use less water. The house has zinc cladding, tons of windows, solar panels, permeable paving, all this green technology built right in.
That's actually really impressive. Are there any other extravagant purchases he's made?
Oh my God, yes. In 2011, he bought this 193-foot super yacht called Senses for $45 million. And he's been quietly buying up private islands across the Caribbean and South Pacific. Like, he owns Hans Lollik Island, Eustacia Island, Cayo Norte, and even Tavarua, which he purchased in 2020.
Islands plural? Wow. Has he had any personal challenges despite all this success?
Yeah, and it's actually quite serious. Larry has this rare vocal cord paralysis condition. His left vocal cord was paralyzed in 1999. And then in 2013, he announced on Google Plus that his right one had also become paralyzed after a cold. It's actually why he stopped doing earnings calls and public speaking. It's related to an autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's thyroiditis.
I had no idea. How has he approached philanthropy with his enormous wealth?
So he's been a bit quieter about his philanthropy than someone like Bill Gates, but we know he's made some significant donations. For example, after his vocal cord issues, he donated over $20 million to a vocal cord nerve function research program at the Voice Health Institute in Boston. And during the Ebola crisis in 2014, he and his wife donated $15 million through their family foundation, the Carl Victor Page Memorial Fund, which reportedly holds assets of over $1 billion.
Has his approach to wealth changed over time?
I think what's interesting about Larry is that he's never really been about flaunting wealth for its own sake. Like, everything he does, even the islands and the yacht, seems to connect back to his vision for innovation, sustainability, or privacy. He once said, "We have a lot of employees at Google who've become pretty wealthy. You're working because you want to change the world and make it better." That seems to be his personal philosophy, too.
Seems like even his personal life reflects his forward-thinking approach.
Exactly. And during the pandemic, he actually spent time living with his family in Fiji. It only became public knowledge in 2021 when it was revealed he'd traveled to New Zealand on a medical evacuation flight for his son's treatment. He's definitely someone who values his privacy while still thinking big about the future.
So, Emma, when we look at Larry Page's legacy, how do you think historians will evaluate his impact on technology and business?
So I think there's this really fascinating comparison that's been made between Larry Page and Johannes Gutenberg. You know, the guy who invented the printing press back in the 1440s. And it's not really an exaggeration when you think about it. Gutenberg's printing press completely revolutionized how knowledge was spread throughout Europe, right? It helped usher in the Renaissance by making books accessible to people who weren't just like super wealthy or in the church.
That's a pretty massive comparison. Do you think Google really ranks alongside the printing press in terms of historical importance?
I actually do. I mean, Google essentially democratized information in a way that's never been done before. Like before Google, information on the internet was this chaotic mess that was really hard to navigate. Page and Brin created this system that could organize literally billions of web pages and make them instantly searchable by anyone, anywhere. The authors of the Google story actually said, "Not since Gutenberg has any new invention empowered individuals and transformed access to information as profoundly as Google."
When you put it that way, it's hard to imagine modern life without it. What about his impact on business practices?
Oh my God, he's had a huge influence there too. His management philosophy, especially that 10x mentality, has become almost legendary in Silicon Valley. The idea that you shouldn't just aim to make something slightly better than the competition, but 10 times better, that's changed how tech companies approach innovation.
What about all the recognition he's received? Any notable awards?
Yeah, tons actually. He and Brin received the Marconi Foundation Prize in 2004. They're both members of the National Academy of Engineering, fellows of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Fortune named Page their Business Person of the Year in 2014, calling him the world's most daring CEO. And interestingly, in 2015, he was voted #1 on Forbes' America's Most Popular Chief Executives list by Google's own employees, which says a lot about his leadership style.
Beyond search, what aspects of our daily digital lives has Page influenced?
Practically everything, honestly. Think about it. Android powers most of the world's smartphones. YouTube has completely transformed how we consume video content. Gmail changed email forever. Google Maps revolutionized navigation. And that's just the mainstream stuff. The way we access information, communicate, navigate, entertain ourselves. Larry Page's vision has shaped all of that.
What about his impact on the structure of tech companies themselves?
That's actually really important. When he created Alphabet, it was this totally new model for how to structure a massive tech company. The idea of separating the core profitable business from the moonshot experimental projects was revolutionary. It's allowed Google to keep innovating while still delivering for shareholders. Now we're seeing other companies trying similar approaches.
Do you think his gradual retreat from the public eye has affected his legacy at all?
I think it's interesting because unlike someone like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, who are like very much the face of their companies, Page has deliberately stepped back, but his influence is still felt everywhere in tech. He's become almost this mythical figure who represents big thinking and ambitious innovation. And honestly, his focus on pushing beyond what seems possible might be his most important legacy of all.
So, as we wrap up today's episode, Emma, what's your take on Larry Page's journey? From that computer-obsessed kid in Michigan to one of the most influential tech leaders ever.
Oh man, it's such an incredible story, right? Like, this guy started with a PhD research project about mapping links between websites, and it turned into this company that literally changed how humanity accesses information. And I think what's really fascinating about Page is that he never stopped thinking big, you know? Even after Google became successful, he kept pushing for these moonshot ideas that other people thought were crazy.
What do you think is the most important part of his legacy?
I think it's that combination of technical brilliance with this like relentless ambition to solve huge problems. The PageRank algorithm was revolutionary because it understood that the web wasn't just a collection of documents. It was this ecosystem of connections and relationships. That insight changed everything. But beyond that specific innovation, I think his willingness to take these massive risks on things like self-driving cars, extending human lifespan through Calico, or restructuring Google into Alphabet, that's what makes him so unique.
It's pretty wild that a single person could have that much impact on how billions of people experience the world every day.
Exactly. And you know what's crazy? He's still only in his early 50s. Like, who knows what he might still do? The underlying philosophy that seems to drive him, using technology to solve humanity's biggest challenges, that's something that'll probably continue to shape our world for decades to come. I mean, when you think about how many industries and aspects of daily life Google has transformed, it's honestly hard to overstate his impact.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode of Behind the Billions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life and impact of Larry Page.